pleased and honored this morning to introduce our speaker, Curt Collier, one of our free leaders here at the New York Society. Curt served as leader for the Riverdale Yonkers Society for Ethical Culture. He has written extensively on ethical culture, and on behalf of the American Ethical Union's Growth Development Team, is a frequent guest speaker to groups considering joining this movement. He's the founder of Just Matrimony, promoting marriage equality for gays and lesbians, and has served as co-mentor for the Humanist Institute and Humanist and Leadership Training Programs. Putting his environmental ethics into action, Curt left the Riverdale Society to work as Deputy Director for Groundworks USA, an organization that works on projects for urban renewal and environmental protection. So good morning and welcome, Curt.
Thank y'all and happy spring. It's finally here. It's what weather should be like in February when I get home. It comes here almost in May, but it's great and I love it and it's wonderful. And I survived another Earth Week. Yay! This is the time of the year when environmentalists never answer the phone, close the shades, and lock their doors. Because we get 400,000 people calling us, mostly politicians wanting to stand there with a little bag of trash for 2 hours. It's kind of like the rabbi at Yom Kippur or something like that. You know, you see once and you're all here and then you never see them again. So, but anyway, it's really, really great. I was sitting at my desk working on this big USDA grant that Groundwork got, and have been working on these ideas for quite a long time. When my coworker came in the door and silently slipped this in front of me and then backed away. So I'm like, oh, okay, what to eat now? The Anti-Food Snob Diet by Dr. Mehmet Oz. And I'm thinking, well, that's an intriguing title, and I didn't have time to look at it that day, and I thought I'd just look at it later on when I had the chance. And then I read it. And like scores, hundreds of people around the United States was immediately offended by everything we read in the article, which is so surprising. I mean, how many of you watched the Dr. Oz show? None of you. Good for you. He's a jerk. Let's just sit out here and have lunch. No. If you're not watching him, then that's what I had to defend him. It's actually a pretty good show. I've seen it maybe once or twice, home for some strange reason or someplace, and it's interesting. You gotta wonder why a man has to wear scrubs while he's standing in front of an audience. And I'm like, would you wear your scrubs out? Dr. DeBrock, no, out, at the restaurant and then do a food show and then really go into surgery wearing the same pair of scrubs? Probably not. So you have to wonder, for those of us who pay attention to such things, that, I wonder if that's just a form of theatrics. Now, my college professor would have said, be careful, you're slipping into argumentum ad hominem. What does argumentum ad hominem mean?
Against the man.
Right, when you just make, you attack the person rather than the ideas of the person. I mean, it's really one of the genetic fallacies. We love to do it in this country. Everybody loves to do it because we attack the person rather than the strength of the veracity of their ideas, which is really what we're here about. But essentially what he does in this article is to say, you know what, don't be a snob or elitist and shop at farmers markets. Use those words. Don't be like those snooty people who are out there buying truffle oil and European cheeses. I've never seen those in a farmer's market, but I need to shop at the one that he's shopping on because that must be pretty amazing if they can get those locally. I think his farmer's market is in Holland. But then he goes on to say, of course, that the food that you find in your supermarket is nutritionally the same. Now, he has been attacked by scores of people. In fact, there are lots of websites, and people are just truly upset with him. Dr. Oz, in fairness, has done much to talk about why you should buy foods from farmers markets, what is healthy eating, what's wrong with our food system. He's done quite a bit of that. That's why it's shocking when we actually read an article written by him that the people who are buying that stuff are nothing but a bunch of snobs. Now, he recently came out and said, oh, well, I didn't mean that. I was trying to be self-deprecating and say people like me who are snobs, who go in to buy these places. But you don't really need to because the food in your supermarket is nutritionally the same. Now, I had a very, very, very lucky Master's of Science program. I ended up at Texas Tech University where they hired a woman who was a new PhD, relatively new, who became my major professor. She was exactly my same age when I was working my master's. That shows you how smart she was. It just drove me crazy. She was also a feminist, and she just drove me crazy at the time because every time I did something wrong, she'd stop me and remind me why I was not being very smart. So she was brilliant. The woman used to take out schematics for computer programs and for stuff and read them like some people read the newspaper. She could look at a schematic and more or less tell you what it was going to do, that little machine. And she read everything, and she forced us to be very, very, very good scientists. It wasn't until years later that I met candidates in other programs that I realized that this woman had drilled into us constantly everything about the field of audiology. So much so that I, as a whim, was out visiting my brother in Los Angeles, and I ended up at the prestigious House Ear Institute that gets like 500 applicants a year and takes 2 interns. And I interviewed and thought, what are my chances? And they hired me before I even drove home. I was on the way back to Texas when my major professor called me. And because it was such a great program, and I published in some ear and hearing journals and some peer-reviewed and did some pretty good science there, that Texas Tech University hired me back. I became a professor even though I didn't have an adjunct professor, even though I did not have my PhD. And then the Health Science Center hired me to set up the audiology program for their new school. So I knew something about the field of audiology is what I'm trying to say. And then I went to the Health Science Center, Texas Tech, brand new building, multi-million-dollars, every equipment I could possibly want. And then, of course, the School of Otorhinolaryngology came to me and said, we'd love for you to give a presentation to our students to teach them about ear and hearing because they don't get that much of it in medical school. So I thought, okay, and I got all set up for that. And I said, by the way, how much time how much longer of a lecture series do you want me to do? They go, 15 minutes. Like, you want me to explain everything about the ear and hearing and diagnosing diseases of the ear in 15 minutes? And I said, yeah, that's about what they get. So it started with me working at the University Medical Center there, the idea, please excuse me, Dr. Brovner, that not all doctors are experts in everything, right? We know that. They're humans, they have very specified fields, they can excel in the fields, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're geniuses in anything else. That got confirmed with me when I opened up a private practice and started working and saw doctors who were prescribing mycin drugs, kanamycin, streptomycin, for ear infections. That's like taking a sledgehammer after a flea. And in fact, these drugs can cause hearing loss. And I would routinely go to the doctors and say, what the heck are you doing? They said, well, these are poor people, they're only going to buy 1 or 2 pills. I want it to be a powerful one. Now, would you ever do that in your practice?
Never.
Never, right? You would never, ever do that. It just, the science of that makes absolutely no sense. The only thing you do, of course, even if the person can only afford 2 of these super powerful, like for kidney infection types of pills, you would never do that. There was also a local doctor in town who decided that they can make a lot of money selling hearing aids, and every time they walked in the door, I immediately took the hearing aids off the kids and tried to send them back to the state, because most of the kids, of course, were faking it, would go there to get the hearing aids within 5 minutes. And I finally went to the state and said about this doctor, and of course they did nothing about it. So it made me very suspicious that doctors, like everybody else, we have a field of expertise, and then we talk outside of that, we can make mistakes. Obviously, this gifted cardiologist, Dr. Oz, is not a nutritionist. The first thing that he does. But he says several things in the article which even in his own show are blatantly not true. Things that he knew himself. I went back through, after reading the article, getting so angry and spitting all over everybody about this thing, went back, Googled his shows and his website, and found places where he himself supposedly wrote these articles, and of course you know he never did, somebody else wrote them, said things which were totally different from what he said in the article. Which makes me think, why did you do that? Why would anyone do that? Why would you say things you know are categorically not true, right? So and to say that those of us who shop in farmers markets promote, I built a big new community garden with my whole team there in Yonkers. We're building bigger, expanded farmers markets. And for him to say that that's just a bunch of elitism doesn't make sense, especially in a town like Yonkers where most of the people shopping there are not elitist. All right? So I don't understand what he would say that. But he goes on how foods are all exactly the same. For example, I'll just give you a couple examples. He says, well, if you're faced with the difference between buying regular peanut butter and organic peanut butter, there's no difference between the two peanut butters, nutritionally speaking, he said. You might as well just buy the cheap old stuff. Now, the strange things about peanuts is when they grow, they're heavily susceptible to a type of fungus called aflatoxin. And this fungus can produce that, and the peanuts, of course, can make you gravely ill. So to prevent that, of course, they spray them heavily with chemicals. Now the problem with that is a lot of those chemicals can then penetrate the peanuts. And you should never buy nothing more than organic peanuts because you're just eating so much of that toxin that's in there. You can actually buy peanuts that don't have this kind of stuff. He says there's no difference between a battery cage raised chicken's egg or chicken than a free-range or organic chicken that's not fed antibodies and not fed hormones and not fed all of these rare kind of things that they feed chickens just to get them to look like giant fat monsters so they can harvest them quickly. Why would he say that if he knows that those eggs, and he's repeated himself, that those eggs are not the same, right? He talks about all meat is the same. And yet we know that our meat is laden with antibodies and growth hormones and all these things. Or you have to wonder why in this country puberty is no longer age 13. When is puberty in this country now? Age 9, 8 or 9. Right? Kids go through puberty at age 8 or 9. You have to wonder why suddenly we've moved puberty so early. And scientists have directly linked that to the strange growth hormones and all the things that we put in our food. And yet he says, well, my point of my article, and he came back and defended himself amongst the thousands of attacks from across the United States. He said, what the heck are you talking? We thought you knew what you're talking about. He basically said, well, what I meant to say is that they're nutritionally the same, and therefore you have to think about the poor people, he said, that they can't be like you, and he calls us snobs, elitists, who can go and buy this kind of fresh kind of produce. They can't do that. Now, that makes absolutely, totally no sense to me at all. Now, he does say, of course, the problem with organic food is that it rots quicker. Right? You could buy, and that the family who can go to the farmer's market pays more money, supposedly, buys that vegetable, gets it home, and it rots much longer than that. And so therefore he promotes people should really only buy frozen foods, which by the way are not bad. Frozen foods are not bad for you. But I'm looking at them, well, Dr. Ross, geez, why can't I go to the farmer's market and freeze the same produce that I'm buying at the frozen market? Right? Why can't I do the exact same thing, just freeze it myself and not have the kind of crap-laden food that we're getting in our grocery stores today, right? And by the way, he ran this on an episode himself, that this is the best way to do it, is to go to an organic farmer's market. Now, maybe people complain that organic food is more expensive, right? It is true on average that organic food is more expensive. The number is shifting quite rapidly. As you know, Walmart finally just got into the organic food business, and as goes the world, walnut, so goes the world now. And the price differential to them too is getting closer and closer. And in fact, the thing to do is the reason why organic food is so expensive is that we buy most of our food out of season. I know what the prices are for organic produce during the summer. They are the same price as all of the other produce because there's so much of it. The best thing for you to do is to go to the farmer's market, buy what you need in bulk, and freeze it just like he advocates buying bird's eye because it's such a great mechanism, but it's not chemically laden food. He should have done that argument. But he says, well, the poor can't afford to do this. And I must tell you that I did food surveys in Yonkers, Texas, Yonkers, New York, and I've done it with some of the least wealthiest people there. In fact, a large number of homeless were part of the survey. and they were all aware that they did not want to eat the food anymore in the supermarket. Right? They were aware that they would try and buy the food if they possibly can, or had a place to put it there. Right? So he says, well, they're just, my argument, he said, was nutritionally they're the same, and therefore the only difference is the price. And that's the part that just drives me crazy. He thinks they're just as wholesome, and therefore if they're just as wholesome, buy the cheaper food and let people eat fresher vegetables. That's not true. Right? There are many ways that when you buy food in the supermarket, the reason why organic food supposedly is more expensive than regular food is because regular food is chemically subsidized. Right? There we have this thing called food subsidies in this country. True, they would say, well, organic food is subsidized. That is correct. They get 10% of all the millions of dollars in food subsidies in this country go to organic farmers. 80% go to the chemical-laden farmers. So therefore, it's an uneven field to begin with. They are using lots of chemical and synthetic fertilizers on their food, subsidized by you. So you're paying not only for the food, of course, the second thing you're doing is you're paying for all of this subsidies that go in there. Right? Now, Dr. Oz goes on to say that, the second thing that you're paying for is the cost of the chemical cleanup that goes in there, right? We are polluting our water system in America. The Ogallala water system is aquifer is one of the largest in the country. It runs from North Dakota to where I was in Texas, in Lubbock, and taught at Lubbock, Texas. That entire way, the underground aquifer. 90% of the samples that come from the Ogallala water aquifer right now are polluted with nitrates, right? Because they dump so much chemicals onto the water system above that it seeped down into the water table and polluted them. We can go to the Gulf of Mexico now and find huge eutrophication zones, dead zones, where nothing can survive. No oxygen in that water. It's the size put together New Jersey and Connecticut and put that right at the right mouth of the Mississippi River. Those two pieces of states. That's how big that eutrophication zone is. Right? So there's no oxygen in there. And all of that is caused by chemically induced water that's going on there. And we don't even know what the impacts of genetically modified food. He says doesn't even mention the impact of genetically modified food in the article, which also just doesn't make sense. Right now we're growing corn that makes its own pesticides, right? We're taking salmon DNA, right? And we're mixing it with vegetable DNA so that the plant can produce its own antifreeze, just like the salmon doesn't freeze in cold temperatures. Things like that we pay a price for later on. But that's just the other way that we pay that. We also, of course, pay for the healthcare cost of those who are exposed to all these toxins. Currently, there are 2 million food workers in the United States on an average, and most of them, every year, about 10 to 15% of them suffer some kind of chemical toxicity levels. Right? With 1 to 2% being hospitalized for using that chemicals. When I worked in a kibbutz in Israel, I'll never forget, they strapped a big old thing of Roundup in my back, and I used to walk up and down the field spraying with this herbicide, and the thing dripped all over me. And I used to tell the guys, well, you know, this stuff is toxic. I knew what Roundup. I'm from Texas, working out and coaching things. This stuff is dripping. Do you have a pack that doesn't leak? And they go, well, no, not really. Just use that one. You'll be fine. I wasn't fine, right, from that. And that's the same thing. We're spraying all of our foods, and healthcare workers are being exposed to that. In this country, we use 1.1 billion pounds of fertilizer each year. That's enough for all of y'all to get about 3 pounds of fertilizer each. Right? 3 pounds, of pesticides. That's just pesticides we use each year. 1.1 billion pounds of pesticides, right? That gets sprayed all over our food. Many of these things, of course, bioaccumulate into the soil. They get in there, they stay in the soil for a long time, and they build up into the environment, and it has a big impact on us. Not to mention all the chemicals that we're putting in all of our food. So we're paying for the food, of course. We're paying for the organic food. We're paying to the taxes for subsidized chemical farming. We're paying for that person to clean up the environment and all these things that are coming down the line. We're also paying to keep an unsustainable fossil fuel agricultural business, right? 40% of the energy used in our food system goes simply to make artificial fertilizers. 40% of a massive amount, 25% of all the energy used in the United States goes to agriculture. Of that, half of it is used not for transporting our food, it's used to make fertilizers, right? We don't need those fertilizers to begin with. These, when you make fertilizer, you take fossil fuels, of course, they make fertilizer. It even takes energy to make the fertilizer. So we're wasting even more energy making something that we don't need in this country. And of course, the majority of this just goes for feed crops, which is right to grow beef and things like that. So this is the other way that we're paying. We're paying, of course, for the perpetuation of a fossil fuel system, for all the wars and for all the other dumb things that we don't want in a fossil fuel system. We're paying for those as well. In addition, we're paying for our future in greenhouse gases. Many of these these fertilizers, these insecticides, pesticides, rodenticides, herbicides, fungicides, fumigants, many of these things release large amounts of greenhouse gases into our atmosphere. In fact, 12 to 18% of greenhouse gases in the United States come directly just from agriculture, not from industry. It's pretty amazing. So we're dumping all this food, we're paying for all this cleanup, we're paying for all these healthcare costs, but when you go to the store, all of that gets hidden from you because you don't see the real price of what's going on in the store. The only thing you see is that chemically subsidized, artificially grown agricultural products is cheaper than growing as we have for thousands of years as humans. And it makes a big difference. Why else is organic food a little bit more expensive? Because we want to pay farmers a living wage, because we want farmers to be there. Right now, we've wiped out most of the farms in the United States. The percentage, and as I've said many times here, the percentage of farmers in the United States has dropped from 48% to 0.5%. And really the reason why is people couldn't make money off of it. But for the first time in history, we have a chance where the farmer can sell directly to the consumer, right, to the patrons, and that we can create an agricultural system without the middleman where they get paid what they're supposed to be paid. And so we're trying to pay them because we want the farms to exist. We lose the farms, we lose so much more about America. And that's one of the big fears. Because we've lost the farms in this country, it's made it possible now for 4 corporations to control 90% of all food grown in the United States. 4 corporations control 90% of all the food that you eat. Now, something scary happens when 4 corporations make the decision affecting the food and the health of millions of people. The only way to counteract that is to reestablish the farms, to pay them living wages, and that's the other reason why organic produce is a little higher in some places, but not in others, so that we can pay the farmers a living wage. So all of this just surprised the heck out of me, that Dr. Oz would not have mentioned all of these potential health hazards of this food, and not to mention them hardly at all in his article. There are toxicities in our food that although they're nutritionally the same, are nowhere different. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to tell you what you can buy organically, which is another way to do it, and what not to buy. And I've created, actually, others have created a handout for you. And Todd, can you help pass this out? Can you help pass it? be enough. Some of you may want to just look on with the part. Thank you very much. We'll step through today. Now, a little bit about why this list is the way this list is. Many of, of course, the fertilizers we use in this country are based on something called organophosphates. The problem with organophosphates, we can synthesize in a test tube using fossil fuels organic-looking molecules that can be used to help plants. The problem with those molecules is that they also go into our body, and our body gets confused and thinks that they're good things. And we eat those things and they replace parts in our body. For example, remember the old lead scare in the country, right? The problem with our body needs certain metals, like zinc and iron especially. Iron transports oxygen throughout your body. That's really, really important to us. Iron oxides, it rusts, and as it oxidizes, it takes the little bit of oxygen it traps in your lungs. It gets moved to your body where the cells then take the oxygen out, and then once the oxygen is depleted, it comes back into your heart where you breathe in more air. The iron in your blood rusts a little bit again, in a way of saying, takes that with it, because iron is an oxygen transporter. So let's say it's got a kind of a connection like this in the red blood cell, and iron is supposed to plug in there to transport it. The problem is that lead has a plug-in that's somewhat similar. So it comes into our system, and there, instead of iron is lead, and lead plugs in. Lead does not oxidize the same way, and therefore it doesn't pick up oxygen, and it doesn't take oxygen around your system. When children get lead poisoning, literally what they're doing is it's causing the oxygen in their brain to get shut off, and it causes all kinds of nerve damage, especially when kids are growing. Organophosphates are the same way. They come into our body, into our system, and they mimic things that we need. For example, many of the artificial fertilizers in this country still have dioxin. You remember dioxin? What a bad thing that was? Some of you here in New York may remember Love Canal. And Love Canal, of course, is when they discovered all this dioxin in the soil. The dioxin actually affected the DNA of fetuses in the mother's wombs and produced babies with all kinds of deformities. Do you know that most of the fertilizers that we're still using today put small amounts of dioxin back into the environment? So we're spreading this stuff over the entire United States, and there is no safe levels for dioxin. If we know that dioxin is present in some of these fertilizers, why would we ever allow it to be put anywhere in our food? Right? So we also know that certain plants take up these chemicals differently than others and have an effect. So there's this famous little list that comes out every year. So this is a yearly thing called the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15. And each year what they do is they look at it and they determine for that year what you should buy, what you can buy in a grocery store, and what you should only buy organically at a farmer's market or at the organic section of your grocery store. So for example, apples. Apples are routinely on the list in this country. Apples are heavily sprayed, right? They've been in this country for a long time. Many of the animals the insects that eat them came over from Europe with them. They're spread around the United States. So we spray apples continuously. Anyone ever tried to grow apples? Apple trees? As you know, most of it gets eaten up. Most of it gets destroyed. The apples look very, very funny. They're susceptible to disease. And so to prevent that, they heavily spray the apples. In addition, trees take up arsenic from the soil, and where we had a lot of arsenic that we used to use for industry in the country, it's there as well. So some of these is because the plant absorbs it through its roots, some because, for example, spinach. Never buy spinach that's not organic. If you ever took spinach home and you cooked it, it always tastes a little gritty, correct? It's gritty because it's so hard often to get, it's so crenulated in a certain way. It's hard to get all of the dirt off of it. But it's also heavily sprayed, and those pesticides, even after they dip it in chlorine washes, which is what they do, is still there. Chlorine washes don't do anything to remove most of these pesticides. So apples, celery, cherries, tomatoes, cucumbers, grapes, hot peppers, nectarines if they're imported, peaches, potatoes, spinach, strawberries, and sweet bell peppers you should never buy unless they are organic, right? During the summer, these items are the same price as they are for all the other vegetables, if you buy them when they're in season. We're so used to buying foods out of season, that's one of the reasons why we pay our food prices, because we don't know how to take these things, as your mom probably did, either can them or chop them up or put them in a freezer or something and save them for the other times of the year that they should do. The reason why is they put collards and kale and summer squash and zucchini, and they say pesticides and special concerns, is that a lot of the pesticides that we used to spray on those plants still remain in the soil for up to 7 years. So when we spray these things in the soil, they stay there for 7 years, right? So what they do is they spray the soil heavily now, how we grow vegetables. They spray it heavily with artificial fossil fuel made fertilizers. Then the seedling comes up and then they spray that with herbicides to kill all the weeds that grow up, which cause an insect bloom. So then they spray it with insecticides, which then cause lots of rodents to come in, so they spray the fields with rodenticides. Because things are rotting in the field, they spray it with fungicides. Then as things start to get bigger, of course, they spray it with other kinds of things to keep the bugs off them. Then it gets picked, and when they bring it in, they spray it with disinfectants and with fungicides, fumigants. They do all these things, and then they give it to you to eat, right? So these foods on the left, the dirty dozen, should never be purchased unless you're purchasing them organic. The ones on the right are okay to buy in your regular grocery store. Asparagus, avocado, either because how they uptake it or because of the shell that gets removed or for other reasons. So you can save money just by remembering to do these kinds of things as well. Any quick questions I can answer about these things? Yes.
I use spinach a lot for salad, but it doesn't mention arugula, field greens, or romaine. Whether I automatically get them organic, but is it necessary?
Because once again, how they uptake their vegetables and the fact that those field greens are cut at such a young level, often before they're fumigated, they come up so fast they can be harvested quickly. Sometimes they don't have to do that. I mean, it's better to buy everything you can organically, right? I'm not just trying, if you can afford it. If it's out of season, or just buy it in season and freeze it, you buy whatever you can from it. Yes, ma'am?
Well, I call them Korean markets, these little store markets. They usually don't say whether something's organic or not.
Yeah. Well, there's a trick that's going on in the United States. The chemical companies are discovering as they're losing out because they're trying to sell chemicals, right? They have billions of dollars tied up into those industries, and they're fearful of the organic movement. So what they're trying to do is change the labeling and make it much more difficult for people to say what specifically is organic. So for example, if you take certain kinds of plants which animals don't naturally, insects naturally like, and you put them like they do in England, and you rot them in barrels. So you just take this plant, put it in a barrel, let it rot, mix the water up a little bit, and spray that on your plant. They call that non-organic, although it's completely natural and in the environment naturally. They do that. We use comfrey in England, and they're not allowed to do that here. So a lot of times when you go to a farmer's market, you'll see that very few of the booths say organic because they've made the rules so ridiculously difficult to try and get them, but most of them are probably sustainably grown. The fear is that some of that food, as you know, only 2% of the food that comes into the New York area is from the tri-state region, 2%. So if you see it in your market, chances are that it's not from New York. It's from some other place. Yes, sir?
Yes, for the dirty dozen, when you talk about spinach here, is that also pertaining to frozen spinach?
Yes, don't buy it. It's the same thing. They're sprayed. The fields are sprayed with the same stuff. Spinach doesn't like heat. It's actually a cool tolerant plant, so sometimes they can try and grow it before the insects have tried to get in. So early spinach is a little safer than summer crop spinach, but basically avoid any kind of spinach. It's always been on that list. It's also an uptaker. It takes up things out of the soil, including arsenic and those kinds of stuff. Yes, sir?
The supermarkets have all sorts of foods year-round, particularly organic. apples, organic animals anytime you want.
Yep.
In the supermarket.
Yeah.
And we also know that a lot of organic food in this country today is grown by large corporations, just like the regular food.
Correct.
So is that okay, or are they contaminated in the same sense?
I'm not an extremist. I think the fact that they've tried at least does make it better. I know other people say, well, no, because it's still this corporation. But as far as I'm concerned, I don't care. If they try to grow it organically, I'll certainly let it do. The problem is that some of the organic labels that they come from other countries may not necessarily be organic.
Because this is a freezing food and keeping it overseas, that's a different thing.
Sure, we've been doing that from the
It
1890s.
changes the taste, it changes the texture, it changes the feeling of the food, so it's not really a substitute.
That's correct. I mean, the problem with it, when he was talking about his article, is he's talking about macronutrients. Most of the lovely things that we get from organic produce are in the micronutrients. There are a lot of what we call phytochemicals, things which are gone after 7 days of harvesting that perhaps have cancer-causing, cancer-fighting types of good things. So the longer, the fresher you can eat, the more local you can eat, of course, always the better. Other questions over here?
What are the four large corporations that do Monsanto?
Monsanto, Archer Daniels, Midland, Cargill, and the Beatrice, I think is the fourth one. They make, one of them just got bought by one of the other ones.
Ralcorp got bought.
Who?
Ralcorp got bought by Cargill.
By
So
Cargill.
that was used to be Ralston Purina, Ralcorp.
It's also incestuous. There's actually websites now that you can go and trace your any product, isn't it?
Do you think, since Michelle Obama is so interested in healthy food and doing something for children, do you think she could be a conduit for getting some legislation passed to influencing her husband to do this right? And how can we get in touch with her?
Right. 80% of what happens in Congress is about business law and business stuff. It's heavily lobbied industries. And frankly, I love the EPA. I work a lot with the EPA. I love the USDA. I work a lot with the USDA. Don't film this part. But even they, of course, get influenced by politicians who basically say, I don't care what the science is. I don't care what this is. You're going to do this because it's good for America in other ways. So that's the problem with doing it. I think what has to happen, and ultimately, is that we have to take over what our food purchases, not from him. Two more questions. I'm sorry.
I talk to the farmers at farmers markets, and their things, in one farmer's case, he didn't have her give the organic label. I said, well, does it have pesticides? He said, no. Early in the season, we don't use pesticides. We may later on for the final growth.
Correct.
Is that correct?
That's right, because most of the insects don't come out until May, and some of the crops are they're harvesting now. And so some of that is already out there, and they can be ahead of the insect bloom to a certain extent. We do that through what's called forcing, by growing the plants in greenhouses or covering the fields in plastic, getting the ground nice and hot. That forces the plant to come up earlier. Hopefully there's not a killing frost, but we beat the bugs by doing that.
When something is labeled organic, how can we be sure it really is organic? Is there much mislabeling?
The argument is, the research is exactly that. There are a couple of things about that. For example, I mean, it gets really tricky. If you go into the restaurants nowadays, often you'll see these little bags of salad right when you walk in the door. Never buy bag salad. First of all, to wash it, it's triple washed, but it's triple washed and chlorinated, kind of, not just bleached water, but chlorinated water. And they've discovered that through multiple amounts of testing that it's loaded in fecal coliform bacteria, which means the people who are packing it and processing it didn't wash their hands well enough. It's better not to buy that stuff. So if the bag says organic, it says good and clean, and it's not there. And unfortunately, if he was true, a lot of poor people in where I go, they shop for the food in the dollar store, which you should never buy anything you put in your mouth or in on your body at the dollar store. You don't know what is that stuff. Have no clue. It's almost totally unregulated. It's illegal, but it still gets done. One last one from her, Julie, just because she's from Texas.
How about bread and bagels and rolls?
Right. So the problem with all that is bromated flours and all this other kind of stuff. It's just the same. We should try to change our entire system. Right. We have to take back what happened to food in this country. It's just gone to heck. in many different ways. And some of this food, if you've been coming to our environmental food team gatherings, and there's another one today at 1:30, we'll be talking about some more things about this, doing some information. But yeah, I mean, we have to, when they did away with thousands of farms and little businesses that used to make all our breads and cupcakes, and they got reduced by poor corporations whose really only consideration is the bottom line, we changed the food dynamic in this country. Then in the way they violated that trust. All right, last one. I'm sorry. Last one.
Now, you mentioned something about the dollar stores, and the truth of the matter is a lot of poor people aren't getting vegetables and fruits at all, whether it's conventional or organic.
That's right.
So, I'm all for organic, but isn't conventional, at least if they can afford it, better than eating Hostess cupcakes and stuff?
That is exactly what Dr. Ross tried to say. And to a certain extent, I understand what he's saying, that it's at least better to eat whole, real foods that, you know, soaked in pesticides than to eat Hostess cupcakes or something like that, which people are also buying. I do know that working in an extremely poor area like I have for years now, is that they're highly aware of what's wrong with their food. And what I would say is that we should not be making it saying, okay, you might as well eat this food even though it's crappy. Why don't we make all food good? And then they can buy the food that they have to buy and get the same stuff. So it's, why don't the supermarket food be just as good? But you're correct, that's what he was trying to say.
Yeah.
But to me, it's the difference of this. So here's a nice little, you know, organic apple. I went to Fairway, you know, your famous little New York store. And of course, I checked the price, the organic, I think this is a cultivar, the McIntosh, the Fuji. This apple is the same price as the regular apple. So this is an organic apple, it's the same price. But it's grown the way we expected vegetables to be grown, the way we've grown them for millions of years, the way we work with the soil, the things that don't pollute the soil, the way that we can make sure that we're not polluting the soil for generation or fighting over fossil fuels to put all those things in there. This apple is just as nutritious and good for you. According to Dr. Oz, this apple, purchased at the regular store that's not organic, looking at the same kind of Fuji apple, is just nutritionally good for you. My problem is at the time we put chemical fertilizers, fungicides, herbicides, pesticides, rodenticides, cell printing, growth hormones, put all this stuff on there that he says they're exactly the same and just as nutritious for you. Now, to be sure, this is just water for some people. But if it wasn't, which one would you want to eat, and which one do you want everybody in America to eat as well? Thank you.